And the dramatics don't stop in this trial, just when you thought things were going to take a calm turn. Okay, so we're live right now in the Scott Nelson trial. His brother is testifying on behalf of the defense in the penalty phase. The death penalty's on the table. And during the course of his testimony, the defendant got up and objected to what his brother was testifying about. Now, you don't need to be an attorney to know that that is a big no-no, but let's get a perspective from an attorney. Joining me right now is criminal defense attorney Eklund Mercy. Eklund, great to have you here. A defendant jumping up and saying objection. You see that ever happen?
Unfortunately, I have. No. I mean, I even had one person yell out, your Excellency. And so it's definitely...
Your Excellency?
Yes.
Well,
yes.
Hopefully that was an insanity case.
No, it wasn't. And here's the thing. Mr. Fulford
Mr. Nelson, yes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Nelson in this case is basically getting everything that he wanted, which is the notoriety, the publicity. He is getting everything, and he is trying to milk this 15 minutes of fame. Friends, he has been consistent and he has been staunch in trying to get a rise out of every single person he gets in contact with, especially with regards to this case. You saw it with jury selection when he was blowing kisses in the beginning, and now he's yelling out his own objections. So he's not doing anything out of the ordinary. He is trying to get a rise out of these people, and he's doing a bang-up job. Yeah,
it was a conversation that started turning about his father when all this happened, and he objected to the prosecution's objections for constant interruptions. And Joseph, you know, one of the things I'm always interested in, do you get a sense of somebody's upbringing, how they were raised, certain issues, and it gives you insights into them alleged and then later on committing a brutal attack on a person? I mean, is there things that you're seeing from this you're saying, oh, that's a telltale warning sign?
Yeah, particularly in this guy's case. This is a person that has lived without societal boundaries. To the point where the state had to impose boundaries on this guy for most of his life. And this goes deep into his personal history. And we see what happens when he's cut loose on the public. He absolutely brutalizes Jennifer in her last moments of her life.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, if you're joining us, her body was found duct taped, her head and face duct taped. Stab wounds to her back and chest. The medical examiner said it was a combination of asphyxiation and these stab wounds. But Terry, aside from just how horrific that is, every time he makes an action, every time he makes a comment, doesn't it hurt him? Because wouldn't a jury say, this guy, you know, how is he sympathetic whatsoever? He gets on the stand, he makes really cold-hearted statements about Jennifer Fulford, including the fact, ironically, he says her body ended up cold, now didn't it? And zip ties never leave home without it. Now he's objecting. He's basically, in a way, disrespecting the courtroom. Can a jury look at that and say, I think this guy deserves the ultimate punishment?
Absolutely. This is the worst client you could ever hope to have. Under our Constitution, you are allowed a right to counsel. But if I were the attorney for this defendant, I would be sitting in my chair worried the entire time because everything out of his mouth is horrible. He has no regard for the victim, and the jury's looking at all of that.
So we can report, I'm still confused as to this. Apparently, Nelson's attorney walked over to him, and he said to him, he shut mommy up. Now, I don't know what that means, but we are learning more about the Nelson family here. So, Eklund, my question to you is, what is he objecting to? I mean, what is the view that he wants to portray in this courtroom? He gets on the stand and tries to tell his version of events of what happened, that he's not to blame for the death of Jennifer Fulford, but that he was the victim of the criminal justice system. He's thrown on the street. He blames his probation officer. Is he trying to get the right narrative out about the Nelson family?
No, he's not. He's not trying to get a narrative about the Nelson family. I think he's just trying to get his own narrative, that he wants to be seen. He wants to have a voice. He hasn't had one. You know, it was from jail to what have you. Nobody listens to him. He has been consistent with his hate for rich people because they look down on him. And for the first time in ever in his whole life, the world is paying attention to every single thing that he's doing, and he is milking that.
When you give somebody a platform, we're all listening. Joseph, let me ask you this. You know, a lot of times we try to understand the psychology of killers, and when I saw him testify, the way he justified what he did, I was always curious. Do you think that this is the justification in a lot of killers' minds, that they feel society robbed them of something and that they're fine to do whatever they do? Because half the time here on Law and Crime, we see defendants who get on the stand and say, hey, I had nothing to do with this, I had nothing to do with this. Here, he was very blatant about what he did. He was just trying to explain the why. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, an embracing of his actions. I think that that's the most startling takeaway with this, and that's what shocks. That's what has the ability to shock this jury, that he would warm up to this and embrace it. It's like matter of fact. And you know, keep in mind, the jury has seen these images of Jennifer's body. All right, they have seen what havoc he wrought in this poor woman's life, a caretaker nonetheless of other people, and then you marry that up with his behavior, and it is absolutely chilling, Jesse.
Yeah, and as you were talking, we see him grinning and smiling in the courtroom. Yeah. How do you control a client like this, Terry? I mean, imagine representing him. What would you do?
I would be telling him, listen, just sit still and pay attention and look like you care about what's happening in the courtroom, because right now it looks like he doesn't care, and I do agree he does want attention.
Yeah, I mean, he's trying to just do whatever Scott Nelson wants to do. And Eklund, I think I have time for one more question from you about this. Is this weighing test that the jury's ultimately going to have to go back to, the aggravating circumstances versus the mitigating circumstances, what is that weighing test exactly? What do they do?
Well, they look at everything, and they basically look at the aggravating factors in this case, which is the method of how he was killed. I mean, how she was murdered, the malice that they feel that he had at the time, versus the mitigating factors, which is his upbringing and his dad and his mom and those stories and his issues with rich people. So the jury definitely will be using the scales of justice today. I mean, when they make their decision, because it's left and right. With this particular defendant, with Mr. Nelson, it seems that if I were his attorney, I would put that he doesn't want to die. The worst thing is for him is to go back to prison. His worst place, the fearful place for him is prison. So if I was if I was his defense counsel, I'd be like, listen, don't give him what he wants. Why don't you give him what he needs, which is a lifetime in the prison justice system.
That's an interesting perspective, and I want to break it down because in light of what he said when he took the stand. Okay, so Terry, what happens is the prosecution was making an objection about the question, and then Nelson jumps up and objects on his own part. Why do you think he's doing this?
I think he just has no understanding of how this proceeding is to proceed. The judge is trying to clarify that for him and making it clear that if there's an objection to be made, it needs to be to the attorney, and the attorney stands up on behalf of the defendant. So I think the judge doesn't want any of this shenanigans in the courtroom, and he's trying to, put the defendant in control.
Ton of shenanigans, just shenanigans all over the place. We are waiting to jump back live. Joseph, I want to go back to you for a second, if we can. One quick question. I don't know if you had an opportunity to hear what the medical examiner testified to and what she said, but what is your perspective on the injuries here? Because again, we don't want to lose focus on the victim.
Well, as far as Jennifer's injury, she was a victim of multiple stab wounds, which gives me an indication this is a frenzied event, almost overkill. And then you couple this with the duct taping, which leads to a blockage of the airway. So she's shallow breathing already. It's horrific in the sense that she is in her adrenaline's pumping. She has a sense that her life is coming to an end, and all the while this has been fostered before you get to the stabbing. This is being fostered in a ramping up, because he kept her bound and rode around with her for an hour before he decided to end her life.
It's still brutal anytime you just hear what ultimately happened to this woman. We're going to jump back live again. I think we can. This is James Nelson. They're bringing the jury in, so let's not just jump back live yet. I'm also back here with Eklund Mercy. So, Eklund, let me ask you this. You mentioned a really interesting point, and I want to ask you about it. You said that what does the defendant want? Now, one of the questions that he was asked when he testified is, hey, listen, you were homeless. You were on the street. You had no food. Maybe you wanted to commit a crime to go back to prison where you could be taken care of for the rest of your life. What do you think about that?
No, he wanted to mean something. He wants life to mean. He wants to be significant. He feels insignificant. As you can see, even in the murder, I feel like he's gotten every part of every famous murder trial he's probably ever heard about and tried to do that to Ms. Fulford. And then what happens is, I personally believe, is that when his brother was testifying, it got real for him. You know, he was no longer in his quote unquote shenanigans, and it got personal. That's why he objected.
Right.
So there was a clink in his armor, and that is his brother. Once it got to his family, he didn't want to play anymore. So I think that's what it is. He is just trying to make his life count. And the way he can do it based on his position was to commit a heinous crime. And guess what? He got his audience.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's an interesting perspective. And now that we have his brother continuing to testify, let's see if some more of those chinks of his story or chinks of his armor come apart. Let's go back live. Okay, so we are learning more about the defendant, his family, his interactions, and his upbringing, and what led him to ultimately be in this courtroom today. We'll take a break. When we come back, we're going to jump live. Stay tuned.